All right, Dan, let's just start with what that day looked like for you going into work that day.
It was quite a day because my wife and I and son and daughter lived in Park City, and we were closing on our house that day in Park City, moving to a new house in West Wichita and closing on that house. So we had to go downtown and sign some papers, and I can remember getting out of the car and feeling such heavy air. Humidity was unbelievable that day. Later in the afternoon, I started loading up a truck from the house in Park City, going out to West Wichita. We had neighbors helping us. And I got 2 boxes in the truck, and someone said, called from the radio station and said, Dan, we've got a bad storm that's done by Conway Springs, and you might think about coming in because it looks like it could get severe. That was a Friday. I got in and got on the air. I think it was a little bit before 6 p.m. and then all hell broke loose after that.
Man.
It first hit Hayesville and portions of Hayesville, and then started its progress.
I remember a couple of years ago I had a chance to actually listen to some of your coverage from that day. And you know, the one thing that I remember, at least to me, was how calm I felt like you sounded on the air anchoring that coverage. Was that real calm, or is that kind of a, we want to make sure the listeners stay calm? So how does that kind of work when there's a huge tornado on the ground? But yet, I mean, I felt like you sounded so calm, cool, and collected that day.
I tried to do that. I tried to stay calm because I thought it was more important for people to hear what I was saying in terms of the information that was coming in from the National Weather Service, emergency personnel. What I was trying to repeat some of the stuff that was coming from the reporters out in the two-way radios in the mobile units. And I always told people that the best thing to do when you're in broadcast coverage like this is warn but don't alarm. Mm-hmm. Don't scare people, because if you scare people, it's just going to make it worse. So you had to stay calm and explain to them what they should be doing. And it turns out that went on the air that night continuous with no commercials right before 6 p.m. and we ended at 2:30 in the morning on Saturday. It was that long.
Wow.
How many guys did you have in the field? Of course, you're in the studio and you had several mobile units covering the storm, right?
We had at least 5 people out there covering it that night. I was in by myself. This is before we had hooked up with any television station, so it was just us. Mm-hmm. And it worked out real well in terms of getting the information out, but I can remember bits and pieces of the coverage that I'll never forget. One of the worst things was right after the tornado hit the Silver Spur Mobile Home Park in Andover. We sent Lee White, our part-time reporter, who at the scene, and he was close by, and he talked to emergency personnel there, and they said that 22 people had died. And I can remember the feeling that came over me, because the year before, in 1990, we covered the Heston tornado, which was a horrific F5 tornado that left 3 people dead. And here, in the midst of this coverage, I hear the number 22, and I thought, how is this even possible? Well, what happened was, it was so chaotic that night that the emergency personnel in charge of keeping track of the dead and the injured had counted the fatalities twice. So it was 11 people who had died. That was the number we had at that time,
right?
And not 22. And I can remember we thought it was 22, I want to say for a half hour to 45 minutes, and then Lee got back on and said, we've just received a correction that it was this number. There was another instance that occurred, if you remember, there was an area south and east of Wichita, some really nice homes that were flattened, just taken right off the foundation. And emergency personnel were having a difficult time getting in there because of so many people that wanted to see the damage. They were listening to the coverage, they were getting in their cars, and they were driving down on Webb Road or whatever south to look at the coverage, and emergency personnel were calling the radio station and they were saying, Dan, tell people to stay away. Please tell people to stay away.
Right.
And at that time, I started getting angry at these people that were
Sure.
that were doing this. You know? So it was an array of emotion that night.
What's going through your head? I mean, obviously this storm is on the ground for a long time and just basically barrels its way through Sedgwick County and then Butler County. For a long time, you're doing continuous coverage, and you have to obviously warn people. You have to give the information, report what's going on. But obviously, there's emotion that you're feeling too. You just talked about the anger that you had. I mean, during that time, what's going through your head as you know that this is a huge tornado that's doing damage, that's hurting and killing people?
Well, one area that I wanted to make sure people knew about was all the different aspects of the tornado in terms of these people over here need to know this. They need to be warned about this. These people that live over here need to be warned here. So when a reporter would get on the air and start talking about the tornado, I would worry that what if there's another one somewhere else? And I would think to myself, I hope that reporter doesn't talk too long.
Right.
And take up all the coverage when there could be another situation over here that people need to hear about. So I was always thinking about, I need to get this information out. The emergency folks had called me and said, warn people about this. And there was so much information coming, and I'm trying to remember if I was by myself in the studio that night or if I had some assistance. I think we had some announcers come in and help me out to answer the phones, and some sales personnel came in that time and helped out too, because it was such a situation. But I get in a mode where I just have to let people know what's coming and to get the information out as best I can. But the emotions, the two emotions were the feeling that so many people had died, and luckily that wasn't the case. And that anger I felt that time.
This was obviously before the days of cell phones, really,
Oh, yes.
and social media, people taking pictures of the storm and sending it in. Did that make it harder to get the information, or you said a lot of information was coming in? The fact that all that technology wasn't around at that point.
No, it wasn't around, and people would call in on a landline to get information on. But all of our reporters that were talking about what they were seeing were doing it from two-way radios. So we had 5 out in the field, and every once in a while a two-way radio there'd be some interference, and I'd have to jump to another one. And it was something that was, always worried about the signal giving out, and then another one would pick it up. But without cell phones, it was difficult.
Sure.
But we didn't know it then. We didn't know what it was like then.
Yeah, exactly.
So it really, for you guys, it was an event that was 2 events. It was first the weather coverage,
Yes.
and then you went into breaking news mode. What was that transition like?
That was difficult because I felt a responsibility to my family to help my wife move boxes into our new house, but I'll be honest with you, I felt like I had a greater responsibility to cover what this tornado did for the rest of that weekend, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think I got 2 to 3 hours sleep and got back out and drove immediately down to the area that kind of by the Air Force Base that was hit, and outside that. I remember walking up to some folks that were looking around on the ground, and it was an elderly woman, and I said, ma'am, what can I help you with anything? She says, I lost my wedding ring. I took it off the night before and put it in a drawer, and then the tornado hit. And I know we've lost everything. Their house was a 2 to 3 story house. It's just beautiful home that was flattened. And I don't care about the house, I don't care about, I'm just glad we're all safe, but I would love to find my wedding ring. So I can remember helping her look for her wedding ring for like about an hour or so before I had to leave and go and cover another aspect of this. But it was such an emotional thing to see the people that were hurt, but it was also uplifting to see how many people drove to the area to help the next day, and they kept coming. They kept coming, and that's because of the people that live in south central Kansas and the
Right.
state, this part of the country. They want to help.
Looking back, obviously for 25 years, since that event, what does that day mean to you now, 25 years later?
Just the memories, that tornado, the Heston tornado before the tornado that hit Hayesville in '98, I think, or '99, then the one that hit in Oaklawn in 2011, I believe it was. Those were such big events, and always at KFDI News, people relied on the breaking news, and they relied on severe weather coverage. And there were so many times in the middle of the night you'd get called out to cover a severe thunderstorm warning, and I'd find myself on the Reno-Sedgwick County line at 3 in the morning, sitting there in the dark waiting for a storm to come in. But these events just overshadowed everything so much. And I felt personally a responsibility to make sure that the people knew what was coming, warn them. Since that time, so many people, like for example, and I'm not downplaying tornado tours, and I know people enjoy that, but we did it to warn the people that lived around here. We went to, and they still do at KFDI, go to classes from the National Weather Service every year, classes that are designed for the reporters because they move around so much to follow a tornado, to know what they're looking at. We didn't just get out there to say, wow, it's raining hard, or the wind is really strong. We knew what part of the cloud to watch to see what was going to happen. We looked for rotation in a wall cloud, for example. We had to know what we were doing, and when these events happened, we felt like we were able to warn some people a little bit about what happened. I got it, this just popped into my mind, and I have to tell you, and to this day, it means as much to me as anything, and I'd like to meet this gentleman again, and I'll explain who it is. It was a couple of weeks later, somebody called or went to KFDI and walked into the front desk and asked the receptionist to talk to John Wright. Well, John was out covering a story. I was in my office, and they called me and they said, Dan, this person wants to talk to John. John is not here. Do you want to talk to him? And I was the news director. I said, sure, I'll go up and talk to him. I walked up there and I introduced myself to this man, and he immediately started crying. And I said, sir, what's wrong? Come back to my office, let's talk. I don't know what the problem is. So I brought him back to my office, and he said that night of the Andover tornado, he was driving from his job in Wichita back home to, I believe he lived in Augusta, and he was on US 54, Kellogg. He was listening to our coverage. The tornado had just hit the Air Force Base, McConnell, and was moving towards Andover. John Wright was in Mobile 22, and he said that if you're moving westbound on 54 highway, or I'm sorry, eastbound on 54 highway, get ready, because it looks like the tornado is getting ready to cross the highway and strike Andover. This man stopped his pickup and got out of his pickup and looked, and the tornado passed in front of him. Wow. He said he was in such an area that he could not see the tornado to his right, to the south of him. He said if he hadn't heard John's report, he'd have driven right into it.
Wow.
And he said, I just wanted to come here and tell John Wright thank you. And I got his name, and I think John talked to him later, and I feel bad that I forgot the man's name. But maybe with the coverage that this anniversary is bringing, he'll come back and say hello.